Tom Murphy, the mayor of the village of Mamaroneck. I'd like to also acknowledge that we have our U.S. Congressman, Elliot Engel. And I would be amiss if I wasn't to acknowledge a person that she emailed me late last night, and due to the COVID, she cannot attend this evening's events. Our families go back, I want to say, almost 60 years. She knew me as a little kid when her son and myself used to build go-karts and go sleigh riding. Back in the days when we both lived in Mount Vernon. She's been a pillar of here in the town of Mamaroneck for many years. Former town supervisor, Dolores Battaglia. I wish I could say that racism and prejudice were only distant memories. We must dissent from indifference. We must dissent from apathy. We must dissent from fear, the hatred, and the mistrust. We must dissent because America can do better. Because America has no choice but to do better. These words were spoken by Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, our first African-American Supreme Court Justice in 1992. Because today, we mourn the death, but Justice Marshall's words are as poignant today as they were when he said them in 92. We are gathered here this evening to mourn the death of not only George Floyd, but of Maude Avery, Breonna Taylor, and Eric Gardner, and many more before them. Black men and women who were killed by the same racism and social inequalities that many of our parents, who are not here today, fought to overcome. Our first speaker this evening to speak of the life of George Floyd is Reverend James Taylor of the First Baptist Church of Mamaroneck. Reverend Taylor.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to everyone. I didn't hear everybody. That's right. I started to write out what I wanted to say today, but I said if I wrote it out, I would probably be here about 30 minutes. And I don't think you want me to stand here for 30 minutes. But I'm glad and very happy to be a part of this. I'm glad to be here, but I'm not glad of the reason that we're here. It took a young man to lose his life for us to stand up and say enough is enough. And when we say enough is enough here in America, we're not just saying it just by ourselves, but all around the globe. Countries and people are in the street marching for equality, for justice. And until justice is received, until everybody is treated the same way, regardless of the color of your skin, until we reach that day, we will always have situations that we had with George Floyd. When people don't care about a life, what kind of person is that? But we have an opportunity to make a difference today, because what we've already seen happen, we have an opportunity to get out in front of it and change things and make changes here, make changes there, to make sure that nothing like that happens in our community. And it's going to take all of us, not just a few of us. We cannot do it alone. We need every one of you. We need the houses of worship to give leadership that people might realize and understand that we are no better than anyone else is. We have to do our best. And we have to teach our young people as they grow up from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old to go to school. We need to teach them that the color of a person's skin does not determine who that person is. We can't tell them, you can't speak to this one, or you are better than they are, you are better than she is, or you are better than he is, because when you tell your child that they are better than somebody else's, he's really not as good as those that you're telling he's not as good as. We must carry the message not only to the streets, where we are so glad that there is calm protesting, not radical, not destroying property, but protesting by walking and being supportive of each other. And when we do that, when we learn how to get together, when you learn how to stand with me and I learn how to stand with you, regardless of what your situation might be, because most of you don't understand what I say when I talk about racism and oppression, because I went through it. I was raised in North Carolina. I was there. I dealt with the Ku Klux Klan. I dealt with oppression. I dealt with segregation. So I know what it is. I know what it is and how our young people today feel. And our young people today shouldn't feel the same thing I felt 40 years ago. They need to see that there's a future in America, and all of us are in this thing together. We're in the melting pot. You put me in there, you put you in there, you put this one in there, you put that one. After a while, you just got a big pot of good soup. Something that everybody can take a part of. So I just want to say that I'm happy to be here, and thank all of you for coming tonight. Just to say, you care. You care, I care, and all of us care about each other. Look at the person next to you and just wave at them. Now, don't just put your hand up in the air, but look at them and wave at them. Huh? If they don't wave back at you, you need to go over and ask them why they ain't waving at you. Thank you so much. God bless you.
There are those among us, and I am one of them, who at times have given up hope. The hill is too high to climb, the river too wide to cross, the bridge too far to travel. But I have renewed hope. For last week, Friday night, as I stood in the pouring rain in Flint Park, searching the many faces for my own daughters, I saw the sign of hope splashed across the faces of young adults gathered to say, Black Lives Matter. Gathered to say that we are in this fight together to put an end to police brutality and the systematic prejudices that have strangled our country for far too long. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present an organizer of that peaceful march, a beacon of hope, Ms. Kayla Yan.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kayla Yan. I am 16 years old. I am a junior at Mamaroneck High School. I'm an older sister and a community member. When I was asked to give a speech today, I thought to myself, what message do I say? What do I want to give to this community? One of the best ways to educate others is through sharing a personal experience. I don't feel like I'm a valid person to share racism's impact on me. I'm a light-skinned, light-eyed Afro-Latina. I'm sometimes white passing. My experience in a racist America is different from those with darker complexions, different hair types, and different facial features than my own. I want to share the stories of other people who've experienced racism, prejudice, xenophobia, and discrimination. I was once part of a conversation where my friends and I, who are all around the same age, were talking about religion. During the conversation, one of my friends says, "Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you." To that, someone responded, "Isn't that what people say before they're about to bomb a building?" Although she probably didn't have bad intentions, in the moment, those words hurt my friend. That comment was rooted in prejudice and clumps up Muslim people to fit an untrue stereotype. Another story was of a friend who was placed in a group to speak about the issues in our world today. She didn't go out of her way asking to join the conversation. She was invited. Someone else questioned why she would need to be included, to which the response was, "We needed authenticity." Black Lives Matter involves everyone regardless of their skin color. This country was founded by slaves, and black people are still being treated as second-class citizens. We need everyone to join the conversation regarding racism and the many ways it affects our lives daily. The last story is about my little sister. She's 11 years old and in her first year of middle school. One of her classmates told her that kids from her elementary school are not as smart as the kids from the other 3 schools. Why would an 11-year-old feel that way about others? Kids parrot what they hear. That child heard that conversation at home or from another friend and thought it was all right to say to another kid. Racism is taught at home and being brought into schools, and black and brown children are suffering the consequences. I have to take a moment to remember the people who have died because they are black. Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and David McGatty. They were normal people like you and me. They had parents, siblings, cousins, aunts, grandparents, even children who loved them. Their lives were stolen from them because of the color of their skin. The time has come where, as a community, we've decided enough is enough. Everyone can become involved. Everyone should have a say. This is our world. The color of my skin should not affect my abilities or be a death sentence. As a community, we have to unite and be anti-racist. We have to continue hosting these tough conversations, educating and building up another. The Black Lives Matter conversation is here, and it's here to stay. Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to bring up to the stage for a song Melanie and her daughter, Ileana Krautz.
When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark.
At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone.
I'd like to acknowledge our county executive, George Latimer, in the house. George, thank you for coming out this evening. Our next speaker needs no introduction. He's been a pillar in this community for many years. He's been a beacon of hope for us. He has talked the talk, he has walked the walk. He has worked to bring communities together, both black and white. I'd like to bring up now Rabbi Jeff Serkman.
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city. In demonstrations, protests, we face a moral crisis as a country, as a people. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It is time to act in Congress, in your state and local legislative bodies, and above all in our daily lives. Those who do nothing are inviting shame. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. The time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. Though these words reverberate with a resonance so resounding they could have been spoken today, it was 57 years ago tomorrow, the anniversary of President John F. Kennedy's, at the time, groundbreaking national address, simulcast on radio and TV, calling out America for its inherent color bias, urging the enactment of civil rights legislation. But laws on the books, in and of themselves, we know all too well, do not address the heart of the matter. For it is a matter of America's heart. Are we dispassionate or compassionate? Can we remain ignorant to the indignity of others? How can we watch the video of that horrifying 8 minutes and 46 seconds and not feel helpless, heartsick, enraged? Sickened by the murderer posing as a policeman, unlike our locals committed to defend and protect, but equally so by those few men in blue there alongside. For they are not only aiding and abetting, they are committing a cardinal sin. What is the core of the holiness code in Leviticus 19? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. But it is the commandment 2 verses before that holds the key. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you shall not stand idly by while your neighbor bleeds. When Edmund Burke, an 18th century member of Parliament, supporting the rights of the colonists, wrote, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing," he was standing up and calling out the moral bankruptcy of Britain. What kind of people see wrong right before their eyes and turn the other way? When German citizens in the late 1930s or Austrians or average Poles turned a blind eye to the deportation of their Jewish neighbors, the death camps, their final destination, they were simply being bystanders. When white store owners capitulated with Bull Connor, giving a thumbs down to integration, as 1963 Birmingham erupted in violence, the dogs and fire hoses let loose on blocks full of mostly black and some white protesters, they were simply being bystanders. Make no mistake, at moments like these when hate reigns, there are never good people on both sides. So when our nation's moral leadership is absent, as it has been missing in action for well over 3 years, when our common humanity is hemorrhaging, when our nation's pain is channeled into overwhelmingly peaceful protest, denouncing the systemic racism that is the ultimate virus we face, demanding the only known vaccine, justice for all, will we stand idly by, or will we stand up? As allies with our brothers and sisters in communities of color across the spectrum, as witnesses diminished by the senseless deaths of every black man and woman and child, from Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and finally say, enough. My teacher at Boston University, our teacher, Elie Wiesel, understood. He said, the opposite of love is not hate. It is indifference. We are here to make a difference, holding dear the image of God we all share, and so holding each other up. Thus, on behalf of all of us, as a coalition of conscience, we declare that indecision will give way to action, that truth will yet trump power, that dignity will be the undeniable right of all, and that our nation will finally fulfill its promise. After all, if not now, when? So with our hearts and hands in hope unrelenting, may it yet be. Amen.
I would now like to bring up to the stage a voice from the Village of Mamaroneck, from the Community Resource Center, Mr. Larry Alpert.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name, as he said, my name is Larry Albert. I'm a lifelong resident of Mamaroneck, Mamaroneck Village, Mamaroneck Community, and many years ago, at the age of 14, I began my journey as an activist. I became a student activist in Mamaroneck through college, and a community activist in the Village of Mamaroneck throughout my entire life. So last week, when I was asked if I was interested in speaking, I immediately said yes. But after that, I had to step back a second and say, wait a minute. I've been doing this, going to march since I participated in my first rally at 14, right here in Mamaroneck. I've been doing it ever since. So I'm saying to myself, here I am, well over 50 years later, still speaking, protesting, and fighting for the same things we were fighting for back then. So I have some reservations, but I'm here today because I want to represent my community. I want to represent the neighborhood. In the Village of Mamaroneck, whether you realize it or not, there has always been a black section of town. Okay, many of you may know it as Washingtonville. We call it the Flats. That is where we live. That is where we reside. That's where we gather and congregate. Now, in my lifetime in this village, we have had issues with policing the black community. I myself, with many other activists, have approached different mayors. I met the current mayor because of a police issue, and he was very responsive, and we set up a dialogue. So there is communication. So as I stand before you today, I'm saying, I remember Dr. King saying one time, how long? How long before we as the people reap the benefits of a free society? How long before we get the protection under the law, under the Constitution? So when I hear young people saying, enough is enough, I know what they're talking about. I feel what they're talking about. It has been too long. How long? Too long. So moving forward, we have to decide what we're going to do. Where do we go from here? How do we stop systemic racism? How do we fight it? Well, I'm telling you something. As long as I've been fighting it, it's an ongoing battle. You have to keep on it. You have to stay on it. Now, as I say to you that, I have these mixed feelings of animosity and sick and tired, I'm also energized. I'm also have a new spirit because of you. Because when I see what's going on globally, when I see what's going on around the country, people from all backgrounds, from all colors, are out here today because they stand with us. People are no longer standing idly by and letting racism go on. This is an ongoing battle. As we move forward, we have to forge ahead to November. This is a revolution that's going on in this country. We have to keep it up, and we can change things. And I can tell you, from the 60s, we changed this world. We changed this world from the 60s and 70s, and we can change it again, okay? So keep the faith. Keep on it. Stay up. Black Lives Matter. Thank you.
Last week, Tuesday, June 2nd, 5 days after George Floyd was killed on the streets of Minneapolis by white police officers, I, as with many Americans, gathered with my family and neighbors to kneel in a moment of silence for George Floyd. To kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the time it took for the police to take the life of George Floyd. But before the vigil began, children and adults alike wrote in chalk the names of black men and women who have died in this country at the hands of police brutality. As I was kneeling with my wife and children by my side, I looked up from praying, and in front of me, written in the street, was the name of Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old black man killed as he was jogging through town. Armed with a handgun and a shotgun, his killers would later say they thought Ahmaud Arbery was responsible for a string of burglaries that had occurred almost 2 months before he was murdered. I thought of my family. I thought of what motivated my parents to move to this community 38 years ago. A dream, a hope for their children to have the opportunity to get a quality public education, not an education in an inferior school system defined by years of racial redlining. We moved to the town of Mamaroneck in 1972. And in those days, exactly where I'm standing this evening, Walters sold hot dogs. Supplied with only a handful of quarters, a kid could spend hours in the game room at Cook's restaurant. For those too young to remember or new to the neighborhood, Cook's was located where Petco stands today. Growing up, my brother and I heard stories of the March on Washington. We watched as young boys the horse-drawn coffin of JFK traveled down Pennsylvania Boulevard. We watched as our parents wiped away tears when they learned of the assassination of Dr. King. As a very young boy, I had never experienced racism firsthand, but I knew of black segregated schools not being fair or equal to their white counterparts. Our parents have brought a lawsuit against the Mount Vernon City School District, Jeffrey L. King versus the Mount Vernon Board of Ed. Now, it wasn't until my years as a black young adolescent living in Larchmont would I personally encounter racism and the prejudices of white police officers. With my friends, riding my bicycle, with my white friends in town, I was repeatedly stopped by white police officers, interrogated. Where did I get that bicycle? Where did I live? Blinded by ignorance, the police just assumed I was not from the neighborhood. I must have stolen the bike. After all, this was Larchmont, and black families didn't live in Larchmont in the early 70s. I look at my family today, and I have the same dreams, the same hope as my parents did 48 years ago. I say to myself, what little has changed in our society, in our community. My daughter of color comes home all too frequently with stories of ignorant people commenting on her tan or accusing her of not social distancing as she walks with her sister. I, as her councilman, have encountered the stares of fear as I've canvassed neighborhoods for petitions, for signatures. We stand here today to pay our respects for the many lives of people of color who have died at the hands of injustice. No longer can we pass the Kool-Aid if we are to really bring about change. We must organize. We must march. We must work together to end lives cut short by fear or the explicit and implicit prejudices of others. As former President Obama said in his speech, and I paraphrase, if we are to bring about change, we must start here in our community. The time is for dialogue. The time for dialogue is now. It is time to bring the uncomfortable conversations to the forefront, to have conversations with our families and friends. Dr. King once said, one of our most agonizing problems with our human experience is that few, if any of us, live to see our fondest hopes fulfilled. The hopes of our childhood and promises of our mature years are unfinished symphonies. I ask everyone here tonight, help me write the collective ending to our symphonies. So our children will no longer have to kneel for another George Floyd, but will rise in the knowledge that in America, Black lives matter. With that said, I thank you. I'd like to bring up to the stage Reverend Lisa Mason from the St. John's Episcopal Church of Larchmont.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. I want to begin by sharing the lyrics of the first verse of an old beloved hymn. Breathe on me, breath of God. Fill me with life anew, that I may love the way you love and do what you would do. God breathes in us. God breathes into each and every one of us. that ruach of God, that breath of God, that spirit of God that dwells inside each one of us. It fills our hearts. It courses through our bodies. It brings us life and it sustains us. But when we go to exhale our breath, the way we do it is up to us. If we forget or we are unwilling to acknowledge the source of our breath, the giver of our lives, then we often find ourselves speaking out in judgment or in privilege or with degradation against our fellow humankind. We find ourselves being tempted to bully one another, often for the color of the other person's skin, or to find something, a spot of weakness, so that we may puff up our ego, if only for a minute to feel like a winner. Or we use our breath to snuff out the breath of another human being. Because we often feel like we're not enough, and we don't have enough. And you name it, whether it's have enough power, have enough success, have enough security, have enough privilege. When we act out of fear or the ethos of pride or supremacy, then we build walls that divide us one from another. Whether real or metaphorical, walls separate us from being able to see one another as God sees us. And God sees each and every one of us as beloved children of God, no exceptions. But when we use our voices for good, for healing, for reconciliation, for walking beside one another, advocating for those whose voices have been stripped away or silenced or oppressed, then we begin to tear down those walls and build bridges of hope and peace and reconciliation. Now, I am a person of hope. And recently someone out in the park in an early morning run stopped and asked me, "You're a person of hope. What makes you see this opportunity at this time in the world to make any difference in racism?" Racism is systemic in this world. Racism has existed since the beginning of time, throughout history, since the inception of this nation. But what do I believe is different that might actually start to change the past 400 years and more of hurt and pain and oppression? Is first, there's three reasons. First, because we believe in a God that promises to never let us go and to make all things new. Second, because we, for the first time, at least in my knowledge or my experience, as a whole world has faced a pandemic for which little was known, for which there is not yet a cure, and from which no one can possibly escape with any given right walk of daily life. And so the world actually, for the first time, realized, I think, that our breath, our words, our actions directly impact one another. And in the midst of watching the toll that this virus has taken and what lies ahead, which is still so full of unknown, the world was watching as the life of George Floyd was squeezed out of him, brutally squeezed out of him. And the world was called to their knees. In this time, we are called to lament as a world, to recognize the capability of the hurt that humankind can inflict on one another. The time is now to really begin to walk together, to tear down the walls of prejudice and judgment and oppression. It's a time to use our voices, to come alongside those whose voices have not been heard in a long time. And the road to advocacy does not mean the rioting and the looting that is going on, that gives us the temptation or the assumption that the people here to protect us and keep us safe will go to any means to do so. That's out of fear. But the road is to walk together. I have seen this community, these 3 communities and beyond, come together to do everything we can to address the inequality of food accessibility, to make sure that food gets to those who are hungry. I've seen this community come alongside one another to see that the best education possible is made accessible, especially during this time. I've seen people, houses of worship, community organizations, elected officials, people across the community already thinking ahead to what happens when the moratorium on eviction notices passes. We are on a long road. And if we're going to seek justice, then all of these issues and many more need to be walked side by side, using our voices, using our actions in peace, seeking reconciliation, seeking healing. Lamentation and reconciliation have to happen. Lives depend on it. To strive for justice and peace, and to restore and respect the dignity of every human being is God's desire, and it's our call as human beings. God's breath is a breath of love. God's breath is a breath of mercy. God's breath is a breath of seeking justice. And God's dream is that we use the Ruach of God that is inside of us to be instruments of love and mercy and healing and justice. That is our call. Amen. So we are going to end this in a time of silence. Again, we're going to observe 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence. I invite you to either remain seated, to stand, or if you feel so called, kneel, either on one knee or both. And during that time, it's a lot of time. During that time, I want you to first think about how you have used your breath to inflict harm or hurt on another human being, especially someone of another color, and lament. And then I invite you to think about the breath of those, most recently George Floyd, whose breath has been suffocated, squeezed out to be no more, and pray. And then I invite you to think about your breath and how we can each use our breath differently going forward. At the end of that time, we're going to have another beautiful musical offering. And I invite you to stand. And it's going to be a song most of you know. And even though we can't sing it, you can do the motions. And then I invite you, that'll be the close of our time together, our formal time together. And so after that, I invite you to make your way safely with mask and social distancing back to your cars, back to your homes. And thank you for all of those that made this day possible. So let that time of silence begin.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Please get home safe.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today.
Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no division too.
Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you will join us, and the world will be as one.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Join in. This one's Everywhere I Go.
Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. All around this town, all around this town, I'm gonna let it shine. All around this town, I'm gonna let it shine. All around this town, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
I'm not sure where to put this.